What's up guys, it's me, Jeremy. The new Shen rework brings an anti-bruiser, anti-tank playstyle of powerful melee dueling and strong utility, while still keeping his theme and defining features of his taunt and ultimate intact. And I got to mess around with him a little bit on the PvE. Shen is a champion that fits my personal playstyle a lot more than some others, and I had a decent amount of success playing him. So here are my thoughts on how good is the new Shen rework. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you don't enjoy the video, please click the dislike. Anyways, let's get started. One thing that particularly sticks out to me right off the bat is that Riot isn't marketing the Shen rework to any specific role. The decisions they made with a couple of his features in his kit shows that he is going to still be able to succeed in the top, jungle, and support roles. But with the recent reworks and new champions, Riot has typically marketed the character into a specific role since it makes it much easier as a whole to design a really awesome kit that way. But Shen has a lot of potential in all three roles, which I think is awesome. The new Shen on paper doesn't actually seem that different from his old self, but in practice he now has much more defined strengths and defined weaknesses, which has a huge effect on how he plays out in the early game and what he can accomplish in teamfights. In the right matchup he can showcase his strength and dominate, whereas in the wrong matchup, well, he kind of gets dumpstered. He's become a harder counterpick towards tanks and auto-attacking brawlers, while now has a much more difficult time versus poke-heavy ranged champions and high sustain bruisers. And let's get into his abilities. His passive is kind of like what his old W was, in that it procs a shield every time you use an ability. But when you affect a champion or ally with it, it lowers the cooldown by a really significant percent, making it possible to proc the shield twice in a fight pretty easily. This gives him a nice amount of dueling potential and some nice health in the jungle too. But unlike his old W, it's difficult to proc it instantly since his Q has a delay when activating the shield, and his other abilities are too important to waste for just a shield, so you can't really use it for small poke. Instead, it's more about prolonged fights and big trades. With his new passive also comes this Spirit Blade thing that is essentially the bread, butter, and meat of his rework. His Q causes the Spirit Blade to move the position and causes any enemies hit by it to be slowed when running away from him, giving some extra chase potential, but also causes him to be able to kite for his backline randomly when playing as a frontline role, since by running past him to try to get to the backline, you're running away from Shen. This Q doesn't proc his shield passive until the blade finally hits him, which is what I meant when I said there was a delay. After he uses it, his next 3 auto attacks hit for percent health max damage, and if the blade passed through an enemy champion, that percent is increased, and he gets a bunch of extra attack speed for those hits. This is the new offensive tool for Shen, and the large amount of percent max health magic damage causes him to be a great counterpick in lane versus pure tanks, especially those who are stacking health. It also does bonus damage to jungle monsters, giving jungle Shen some nice clear speed now. His W is the main new feature that's coming with the rework, and it places a zone at the current location of his Spirit Blade that causes him and all allies standing in the zone to dodge all auto attacks. It works similar to the Jack's Counter-Strike dodge, meaning that yes, it does dodge on-hit abilities, and this is a really awesome utility piece that you can use to outplay opponents and gives them an awesome matchup versus melee brawlers in lane. And it also blocks attacks from jungle monsters too, making him have a little bit more survivability in the jungle. But honestly, the fact that it activates where his Spirit Blade currently is located kind of makes this tool, as awesome as it is, a little bit clunky to use, since it's kind of hard to move the blade around quickly, so you have to set up your blade in the right spot if you want to totally wreck someone with an outplay. But for just melee brawling and maybe longer trades, it's a really nice ability and actually puts in a lot of work and lets you get off a lot of free damage when combined with his taunt. But it's just not the most reliable defensive tool for teamfights, although it can be really clutch if you use it properly. And for his taunt and ultimate, they are pretty much the same ability, the only difference being that his taunt now does physical damage and scales with bonus health, rather than magic damage scaling with AP. But these two abilities are what defined Shen as a champion in the past, and for good reason. So Shen top I found to be a little bit of an interesting pick. With a combo of all 3 of his abilities, his dueling power is surprisingly strong and puts in a lot of work versus any melee champion. However, since he no longer has any ranged ability other than his taunt, it can be difficult to trade without using it, which adds a lot of potential to be outplayed, because if you somehow miss your taunt or maybe it's dodged, you're going to get punished super hard, and even if you don't, you're still forced to use it when going for a trade, which makes you easy pickings for anyone trying to gank. And since he no longer has a heal in his kit, you have to rely on his shield passive as a form of like pseudo sustain, which versus champions with really good sustain or anyone who has heavy poke, it's just not going to cut it, which is why you will have a difficult time versus those champions. And since he no longer has a ranged form of damage other than his taunt, you can't really CS or poke at range, so his matchup versus ranged champions in general is nothing short of abysmal now, which makes his top laning very hit or miss depending on the matchup. His jungle, however, has improved by a decent amount. The shield is pretty sweet in the jungle, and he has improved clear speed with his Q, and the W lets him block a little bit of damage too. And of course, his taunt and ultimate are amazing for ganks. He does have a tough time in 2v2 or 3v3 counter ganks though, unless you can hit your taunt on multiple targets. But in fights like that, a lot of the time your taunt gets flashed, and then you kind of get wrecked, because in the jungle, he's a bit squishy early, and although his damage is decent, ganks and fights are completely reliant on hitting your taunt, which it's not the worst thing ever, since it's not that hard to hit, it just gives the opponents the opportunity to outplay you. And on support, because of his increased vulnerability to poke and harass as mentioned earlier, his laning phase has become a little bit weaker, especially since bot lane is so filled with ranged poke heavy champions. But the new W is an amazing defensive tool and still gives him some potential for all-in fights, so his teamfight utility has improved a bit, and he still has some potential to come out on top in any lane, especially versus tank supports too, who tend to lack both poke and sustain, which are the main mechanics to look at for countering Shen in any given lane now. Overall, I found Shen to be in what honestly felt like a pretty balanced spot actually. His taunt is now at a little bit of an increased risk to use since his sustain is a little bit worse and he no longer has a ranged damage ability, which is a pretty healthy dynamic for that kind of tool, at least in lane. But being heavily reliant on matchups is something that I personally am just not fond of. It's a reasonable design, don't get me wrong, I just don't enjoy playing that kind of champion. One thing that I did enjoy surprisingly though was Shen jungle, and I actually found it to be better than I initially anticipated, and he does have some potential to be a pretty strong jungler. And we have to remember that his taunt is a fantastic crowd control tool, especially when combined with flash of course. And with his ultimate, he has two fantastic tools that you can use to carry games regardless of how well you do in lane. Even if you have the worst matchup ever, you can still make amazing plays and carry your team, just because of the power that is his taunt and his ultimate. So whether you're taking him top, bot, or in the jungle, the new Shen rework brings a ton of utility and some reasonable dueling power to the game that gives him more than enough potential to succeed despite of his major weaknesses versus heavy poke and sustain. And that's just about it. Here's some of my favorite comments from a previous video where I asked about what your favorite thing about Jhin was. For a chance to be featured in a future video, leave a comment about what your favorite thing about the new Shen rework is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.